Today we're going to discuss another way to solve quadratics known as the quadratic formula. Now the nice thing about the quadratic formula, it always works. Any quadratic you come across, you can use the quadratic formula. As we dive deeper into quadratics and we get into imaginary answers that aren't real, it still works. So I'm going to emphasize that you memorize the quadratic formula to help you with these. It's something you can always rely on. To solve any quadratic, and notice that it's in standard form, here's the formula. It says x equals opposite of b. Now I say opposite of b because if b was already a negative number, the opposite of that would be a positive number. Plus and minus, so there's our two answers for the quadratic. B squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So again, if you need to mark your A, your B, and C in your quadratic before you start, it's going to help you fill in these blanks. I actually have a song that sometimes students use to help memorize this. It goes to the tune of Pop Goes the Weasel. X equals opposite B plus or minus square root B squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Quadratic formula always works. Now, before we dive into the quadratic formula, let's take a look at this piece right here underneath the square root. That piece actually has a name. That b squared minus 4ac is called the discriminant. Now the discriminant tells us something about the roots before we actually find the roots. So if you do that piece that's underneath the square root and it's bigger than 0, so if it's a positive number, you know you're going to get two real answers, which means they would show up on a graph. If b squared minus 4ac is equal to 0, it's only going to have one real solution. It's a double. And if b squared minus 4ac is a negative number, if it's less than 0, you're not going to have any real solutions, which means it's not going to show up on a graph. You're actually going to have imaginary answers. And again, the two answers, the idea of two answers comes from this plus and this minus. So we're going to practice the discriminant first before we actually solve any of these quadratics. So the discriminant says I need to use A, B, and C. So again, if you want to mark them, it might make it a little easier for you. So I'm going to do B squared, so negative 3 squared for A and C. And just figure out what that number actually is. So I get 9. Here I get negative 20 times 2, positive 40. This is 49. I know I'm going to get two answers. Two positive answers, two real answers. Excuse me, two real answers, not two positive answers. In this particular problem, here's A. B is a negative 1. C is negative 4. So when I do B squared minus 4ac, so I'm going to work this out, and I end up with a 1 plus a 32. Looks like I get 33. That's going to have two real answers. This last one down here, here's my A, it's 1. Here's my B. Here's my C. So when I do B squared, that's 144 minus 4ac. So 144 minus this, that actually turns out to be 144, so I get 0. This is going to have one real answer when I go to actually solve these. Now, if I go back and actually do these problems, okay, if I go back up here, I already did b squared minus 4ac. I found out that that discriminant was 49. Some people say, well, why do the discriminant? Why not just jump right into the quadratic formula and get your answers? I'm actually doing part of the quadratic formula here. The quadratic formula says opposite of b plus or minus square root, and I have that number already. That number is 49. So the square root of 49 all over 2a. So I've got a piece of my quadratic formula sitting there. I can do the square root of 49. So x is equal to 3 plus or minus 7 all over 4. Now here's where the two answers come from. If I actually finish this problem out, if I take 3 plus 7 and divide by 4, I get 10 over 4. I'm going to reduce that. I'm going to get 5 halves, or 2.5, as one of my answers. If I take 3 minus 7, I get negative 4. Negative 4 divided by 4 is negative 1. There's my two answers. Okay, so you do get two answers out of these. Sometimes you can do that square root. Sometimes you can't. So if I do quadratic formula, opposite of b plus or minus square root, here's my discriminant, b squared minus 4ac, all over 2a. And as you start getting more comfortable with this, 2 times 2, you could probably do that on the fly. I can't do anything with that 33. Here are my two answers. 1 plus the square root of 33 all over 4. 1 minus the square root of 33 all over 4. If that discriminant ends up being 0, we said this is going to have one answer, one real number for an answer. So if I actually do the quadratic formula, opposite of b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac, I already did that, all over 2a, when I take the square root of 0, I get 0. So 12 plus 0 and 12 minus 0 are the same thing. 12 divided by 2, I get 6, and I actually get it twice. So I get the same answer twice. So we can use the discriminant to tell us a little bit about the solutions. We're still going to use that number in our quadratic formula. It sits right here. So let's do a couple of examples where we're just trying to solve. Again, if it helps to mark A, B, and C before you dive into the quadratic formula, feel free to do so. A is 1, B is negative 4, C is 4. So as I go through that quadratic formula, that formula I have to have memorized, x equals the opposite of b, so positive 4, plus n minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. And I just need to figure this out, all over 2 times a being 1, so I'm just going to leave that as a 2. Start with what's underneath the square root. Negative 4 squared is 16. 4 times 1 times 4 is 16, so 16 minus 16. So I get x equals 4 plus or minus the square root of 0, which is 0. That's how I know I only have one answer. It's a double answer. I get 2 twice. For this particular problem, x equals opposite of b plus or minus square root b squared. I can do negative 1 in my head. Negative 1 squared is 1 minus 4ac all over 2a. Start with the square root. Negative times a negative, that's going to actually make this plus 16. So 1 plus 16 is the square root of 17. And I cannot do the square root of 17. You can leave it. There are my two answers. 1 plus the square root of 17 over 2, and 1 minus the square root of 17 over 2. Last regular example I have up here, opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And again, if you're good with your arithmetic, you could do some of these calculations on the fly as you go, or if you need to write them out, you can certainly write them out. I'm going to get a negative number here, so minus a negative means I'm going to add. So I get something that looks like this, 16 plus 12, which is 28. Now, we've not talked a lot about square roots, but we should reduce this square root. 28 can be broken down. 28 is the square root of 4 times the square root of 7. And I picked 4 because 4 is a perfect square. I can do this part of it. So you're probably not going to see an answer like this when you check your answers. You're going to see something like this. They're going to do the square root of 4, That's a better answer because I reduced my square root. But let's take it one step further. These numbers all have a factor of 2 that can be taken out. So if I take negative 4 divided by 2, I get negative 2. If I take 2 divided by 2, I get 1. So technically, there is my best form, negative 2 plus n minus the square root of 7. There's my 2 answers. Can't do the square root of 7. Now, if I want to get a rounded answer, I could do the square root of 7 with my calculator, take negative 2 plus that, take negative 2 minus that, and get rounded answers for my quadratic. All right, how does this look in a story problem? So this is a group that's doing a fundraiser. They're selling CDs. They're trying to figure out how much they can charge per CD, but they want to get a profit of $200. What do they need to charge for their CDs to figure this out? And they gave you this profit equation. So basically, we're going to take that $200 that they want to make and put it in. Now, I can't use the quadratic formula yet because it doesn't equal 0. It's not in that standard form. But if I move this 200 over so that this equals 0, now I have a quadratic. Now it's in standard form. Now I can use my quadratic formula. And I'm going to get 2 answers. So I go x equals opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times a. Now, I'm going to start right here with my discriminant. My discriminant ends up being 304. So I know I'm going to get 2 answers. I got to figure out which one they're actually looking for. So if I work this out, if I take negative 48 plus the square root of 304, I'm going to use a calculator for that, divide by negative 2, I get an answer of 15.282. And when I do minus the square root of 304, I get 32.717. I'm just going to have my decimals. We know we're talking dollars and cents, so I should probably round this a little better. There's my 2 answers. The question they asked is, what's the least amount that I can charge and still make my $200? So they're asking for the smaller one. There's times where you'll do quadratics and you might get a negative number that doesn't make sense. In this case, a negative number wouldn't make any sense. Other possibilities, it would. Here they were asking for the smaller, so we're going to charge $15.28 in order to make a profit of $200.